The Cathedral of Turin holds one of the most fascinating cloths of ancient times, and probably the most controversial object in Christianity, the Shroud of Turin. It portrays the image of a man who has inspired millions of people over the centuries. Is this the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth? Is the Shroud of Turin a hoax, a brilliant medieval forgery, the artistry of a genius unsurpassed by any of his contemporaries? A carbon dating in 1988 concluded that the cloth was made in the 14th century. But my research over these past 20 years tells a completely different story. I would like to take you on a visual journey to find out more about the man of the shroud. I will show you that the image on this cloth is not that of a man lying in his grave, and that is just one of the several discoveries that may lead to unlocking the secrets of the shroud. The shroud is a linen cloth approximately 14 feet long by 3.5 feet wide. What is unusual about this cloth are the markings which appear to be the back and front image of a man who was buried after a violent death. The shroud has been in the Turin Cathedral for the last 400 years. The shroud was first introduced into Liri, France in the 1350s by a French knight who never revealed the origins of his find. The shroud was later transferred to the House of Savoy and kept in Chambéry, France. It was there, in 1532, that a fire took place that nearly destroyed the shroud. Several burn marks and sewed-on patches that parallel the image still witness to that unfortunate accident. In 1578, the shroud was brought to Turin, where it still remains today. Here, too, it was almost burned, but that was a more recent event. In 1997, the chapel where the cloth is kept caught fire, but fortunately the shroud was unharmed. My personal interest in the shroud started in 1961 when I read a book by the French surgeon Dr. Pierre Barbet, who had done extensive research on the cloth. My fascination with Dr. Barbet's book finally brought me here to Turin in 1978 to see the shroud. What caused Barbet and others to become interested in the shroud was an event that took place in 1898. An Italian photographer, Secondo Pia, took pictures of the shroud, and while developing them in his darkroom, saw in his large negative plate the positive image of a man. How could this be? He finally realized that the original shroud image was a negative. How did a photographic negative get onto an ancient cloth when photography was only invented in the 19th century? But our story is not here in Turin. It is in Jerusalem. For if this is actually the burial cloth of Jesus, the story and the proof are in Israel. In about 30 AD, a drama took place in this city of Jerusalem. A young rabbi was arrested, beaten, and condemned to death. Under the Roman government, he died one of the most horrible deaths ever invented, crucifixion. The wounds seen on the shroud image have a striking similarity to the biblical descriptions of Jesus' crucifixion. The blood marks of the wrists and feet, the scourge marks all over the body, the beaten face are all seen on the shroud. Barbet, the French surgeon, taught me a lot about the shroud. I would like to show you some of his findings. Looking at the face, there's a swelling here under the eye compared to the other side, as if this man had been beaten on the face. Now looking at the wrists and feet, we see that there's some nail marks. These are anatomically correct, because if the nails were placed in the palms of the hand, the weight of the body would have torn through the flesh. Barbet also discovered that when a nail is placed through the wrist of a freshly amputated arm, the thumb folds in the palm, leaving 4 fingers and no thumb. This is exactly what we see on the shroud. Now let's turn to the back. These scourge marks on the back come in pairs and are dumbbell in shape. These are the same kind of injuries that would have been caused by a Roman flagrum. The scourge marks on the upper back are slanted upward. On the lower back, they are horizontal, and on the lower legs, they are again slanted, as if somebody were scourging this man like this, and like this. These pictures were presented to me by the American scientific photographer Vernon Miller. In 1978, his team had taken pictures of the shroud at the image area of the nose at 32 times and 64 times magnification. These photographs caused me to conclude that the image was definitely not painted. The yellow fibers at the top of the threads is the source of the image. There is no sign of paint. This micrograph picture was taken at 32 times magnification over a blood mark. Now, Dr. Alan Adler, a blood chemist, was given actually fibers and particles from the shroud that were taken in 1978. Now, he looked at the particles and he discovered that these particles were indeed blood. Also, another scientist by the name of Bima Bologna, an Italian, made the same discovery. Now let's look at the shroud fibers. Dr. Alan Adler found that the yellow shroud fibers that are responsible for the image were caused by a dehydrative oxidation. This process affects the cellulose, causing it to yellow. It's like a degradation of the fiber, like an aging process. Heat, light, and acid can cause this, but the shroud image has never been reproduced when looking at it at the microscopic level. After visiting the Shroud exhibition in Turin in 1978, I did some of my own research to find out more about the shroud. My first question was, what were the burial customs of the Jews? Why did I ask that question? Because the Gospel of John states that they took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. I knew that the Jewish burial custom was to wash the body prior to burial. However, in my studies, I found that there was an exception to the rule of washing, and that was that if a man died a violent death, then the blood was not washed from his body, but he was simply buried in a cloth. In that Jesus was buried according to the Jewish burial custom, the blood was not washed from his body. Therefore, the shroud with its blood marks is historically compatible with the Gospel of John. See the blood mark off the left elbow? How did it get here? Over the years, I had several theories, but no answer. I finally took the full-size shroud, wrapped it around me, and this is what I found. Here is a full-size tracing of the off-image blood mark placed over a man. See how it drapes, touching the back of the upper arm. This blood flow began at the wrist and, following gravity, flowed down the back of the upper arm, formed a small round pool of blood, then dripped to the ground. The other blood marks in the shroud gives us the dimensions of height and width. However, this blood mark gives us the third dimension, that of depth. Therefore, we know that there was a crucified man under this cloth. Also, this shows us that the blood is a contact process. The cloth came in contact with a moist blood clot. Furthermore, it shows us that the image is not a contact process. Why? Because there is no image where the cloth came in contact with the back of the upper arm when it touched the blood clot. Now let's look at the blood marks on the hair. Did these blood marks on the hair originate from blood that was on the hair? I made a tracing, and I also made a cutout. I took the cutout and I put it on my face to see where the blood marks would land. And as you can see, the blood marks land on my face and not on the hair. Therefore, the blood originates from the face and not the hair. Once again, you can see that there was actually a three-dimensional man under this cloth. Again, the blood marks are a contact process, but the image is not. Because if it were, the sides of the face would be spread out to where the blood is in the hair, causing a grotesque image. But perhaps the most important thing is the direct frontal view of the cheeks and temples of the facial image. This face lies in between the blood marks that were originally on the temples and cheeks of the man draped by the shroud. These blood marks that were on the temples and cheeks now lie out in the hair. It seems as if the facial image was created not at the time of draping, but at a time when the cloth was stretched out and a negative photo of the face appeared on the flattened cloth between the blood marks. This shows us that the formation of the blood marks and the creation of the image were two separate events, separate in time and in space. Moreover, from the work of Adler, Miller, and Jumper, we know that this was not the work of an artist. This was not a painting. Therefore, from all of this information, it can be seen that the image is not a contact process and that it was not made by human hands. My research results was solid. However, it was an article in the New York Times that was about to end it all. The newspaper article said a carbon dating test determined that the shroud was created sometime in the 14th century and therefore was deemed a hoax, a painting by a medieval artist. Had all my research been for nothing? Or so it seemed. Reconsidering the evidence that I had found, including the research of Barbet, Miller, Adler, and others, I decided to continue on with my work. There was just too much proof pointing to a first-century event to just stop with my studies based on carbon dating. So I continued on studying the image. It was in a field like this where Calvary was and where Jesus was buried. These fields are of great importance, not only for their geography, but also for their vegetation. When I was in Turin, I met with many scientists who did research on the shroud. I met with Dr. Max Frey, a criminologist from Switzerland, who explained the pollen grains that he had discovered on the shroud. Dr. Frey found that the origins of these plants not only come from France and Italy, but many are found here in Israel. Recently, Professor Danin of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem studied the work of the Wangers from the United States and confirmed that all the floral images seen on the shroud grow here in exactly the same region where Jesus was buried. I see that there's many flowers all over.
I think that I didn't count them, but there are hundreds of flower images found on the shroud, on the photographs, the enhanced photographs of the shroud. for the
The
database,
conclusions of this pollen and floral study were that the shroud originated in the Jerusalem area in the spring of the year prior to 1350. Finally, regarding the carbon dating test of 1988, the report in Nature showed that the precision of the test was good. However, the scientific literature also stated that 6 samples were advised to assure the best result. Through no fault of their own, the scientists received only 1 sample that was portioned to 3 carbon dating laboratories. That 1 sample was later found not to be representative of the rest of the shroud by a scanning electron microprobe done by Dr. Adler. Therefore, the accuracy of the carbon dating test is in question and needs to be repeated using the appropriate scientific protocol. In 1986, when I was doing my study of the blood on the face, I took a photo of a volunteer in the sitting position. Realizing my error, I then took a photo of him lying on his back in order to duplicate the position of the man of the shroud. Upon receipt of my negatives, I compared the negative of the shroud to the negative of my volunteer. To my surprise, the images were not the same. I did not understand this. Discouraged, I looked over my other negatives, and to my amazement I came across a negative of my volunteer that matched the image on the shroud. Both have light areas around the eyes, under the nose, and at the lips. This finding is something that I could not have imagined in a lifetime. Why? Because I found myself staring at the negative image of my volunteer who is sitting upright and not lying down. That means that the man of the shroud is upright and not lying in burial. I could reproduce body shadows to look like what we see in the shroud by photographing a man in the upright position with light coming from above. I started looking for other things consistent with an upright man. This is the front and back of the negative image of a volunteer with long hair, and this is the image of her lying down. We can see that the hair of the shroud image has the natural flow of an upright man. The blood marks of the shroud are consistent with a man having first been in the position of crucifixion and second in the position of burial. However, among these blood marks is the spectacular negative photo of an upright man whose hair falls to his shoulders and whose feet do not touch the ground. It is as if this man were suspended in midair. One problem was yet unsolved. In my pictures with the bearded man, one thing made the picture different from the image of the shroud: the hair color. On the shroud it is dark. On my negatives, it was light. I now made the photographs again, but now with the volunteer's hair colored white. Now the hair of the volunteer is dark as it is on the shroud. Therefore, if the shroud is a true negative, then the hair of the man of the shroud must have been light in color or white. The shroud image was that of a man suspended in midair. What does that mean? I turned to the Gospels to find out some answers. At first I found none. However, I found out something else. I found out why the Gospel writers would not have mentioned a cloth with an image. From the book of Exodus, second of the 10 Commandments, "You shall not make yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything in heaven or on earth." Also, the Jewish historian Josephus, who lived from 37 AD to 100 AD, tells us that in Judea, images of God, or indeed of man, were forbidden. Jews would rather be slain than have such images in any part of Judea. It was then obvious that if John had ever mentioned the shroud with an image in his gospel, the shroud definitely would have been sought out and destroyed. Now that I knew that no gospel writer would speak openly about the shroud, I began to search for possible covert messages pointing to the shroud's existence. I read the Pentateuch, also known as the Torah, some of the prophets, and the New Testament. Of the 4 gospel writers, only the book of John seemed to offer any hope of giving up secrets. If indeed he wrote about the shroud, he would have had to keep it secret. In reading John's letters, 2 of them indicate that he would not put some things in writing but preferred to talk face to face. To me, this was evidence that John indeed kept secrets. Could it be that John was the keeper of the shroud with its blood marks and image? Here outside the walls of Jerusalem, we are at a tomb that may be similar to the tomb that Jesus was buried in. Let us remember what happened on that early morning. Mary Magdalene came to John and informs him that the body was taken. Then John and Peter ran to the tomb. John got here first, looked in, and saw the linen cloths. Peter got here after him, entered the tomb, and also saw the linen cloths. John then entered and states, he saw and believed. What did he see? What did he believe? First, we know that John did not believe that it was the resurrection. Why? Because the very next sentence of the gospel says, for as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then what did John believe when he entered the tomb? He believed that Jesus is the Son of God. How do we know this? We know this because it is the theme of his entire gospel, so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. What did John see in the tomb? We know that he saw the linen cloths. However, John must have seen something awesome in this tomb to come to the conclusion that Jesus is indeed the Son of God. From the point of view of a first-century Jew, John would have known, as Josephus knew, the corollary of Genesis 1:27, so God made man in his own image, and that is, the image of man is the image of God. John would have also known that images are forbidden. But John saw the sequence of events as they happened. We only see them in retrospect, and it has taken us centuries to understand what we see on this cloth. However, from John's perspective, he saw the face of Jesus with the blood marks before they were covered by the cloth, and again later at the tomb on the cloth. Once he saw the image of the face on the cloth, in between the blood marks, there were once on Jesus' cheeks and temples. He would have known that something special was happening here. He would have known that this image was not made by human hands, and that which is not made by human hands comes from God, a theme well known to the people of Israel. And with that information at hand, we can understand why John exclaimed, he saw and believed. John's possible communication of the existence of the shroud still left unresolved my discovery that the image of the man was upright. Again, I turned to the Bible for answers. John did not have enough information to understand the upright man. Such information only came with the invention of photography. However, the biblical message of the upright man comes from someone else, from Jesus himself. In John chapter 12, verse 32, "And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." Here Jesus is referring to Daniel chapter 7. "I saw one like a man coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His kingship is one that shall never be destroyed." Both of these chapters refer to the Son of Man. Now, during the time of Jesus, the Son of Man was understood to be the Messiah. Now, keep in mind the imagery of these verses. That of a man coming on the clouds of heaven, that of a man suspended above the earth. We have here the imagery of a man suspended above the earth. Now, looking at the shroud, we have the same imagery. The image of a man who is upright, whose hair falls to his shoulders, and whose feet do not touch the ground. This image of the suspended man is the sign of the Son of Man. It is the sign of the Messiah. What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? Then, what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? The Shroud of Turin still holds many secrets, some of which I have tried to unravel. But what is my research worth? A rabbi once asked me, "Why do I study this cloth?" I told him that I study this cloth because it brings me to study the Word of God. He responded, "If it brings you to study the Word of God, then you should study this cloth." His words have been with me ever since. Researching this cloth has involved me in the study of Judaism and Christianity, and I have come to understand the truth that lies within these faiths. Standing here today, trying to understand the Shroud of Turin, as so it was in the past when Jesus was here in Jerusalem. Then the people tried to understand him in the light of their Jewish faith. All we know of Jesus comes almost exclusively from the people of the Jewish faith. Therefore, one is compelled to ask, is Christianity a Jewish event? Possibly the answer comes from Jesus himself. In John 4:22, Jesus says, "Salvation comes from the Jews."